Hey everybody, welcome to the Research Triangle PowerShell User Group. My name is Mike Kanakis, and on behalf of my co-host, Phil Bossman, tonight is July 20th, 2022, and we are happy to have Jonathan Moss here with us tonight, currently a release engineer for Mozilla, and going to be talking about Pester 5 tonight. So we're going to turn it over to Jonathan, who's here in person with us tonight. Jonathan, it's all yours.
All right, awesome. Well, thank you everybody for showing up in person and virtually. I appreciate it. Audio is good for everybody on Teams. Can you guys hear me okay? On Teams, virtually, I'm not watching the chat, so y'all keep me honest. All right, awesome. I will mute that, so I'm not doing a thing. Okay. So I have done a Pester talk before, and it was about 3 years ago where I talked about Pester, Pester version 4. And since then, there's been a major release, Pester version 5. So this talk is going to go a little bit into the differences between Pester version 4 and then Pester version 5. But what I like to do is kind of review what I went over a few years ago and in that same repository of code. And then what I'll do is I'll show some examples of Pester 5 version of that, and then I'll break into another repository to show you just some of the ways that I've kind of reworked that that code. So if you guys have any questions, feel free to ask in the chat. I can't see, so y'all just let me know. There's a lot that I could cover, or I could just cover parts of it. But with Pester, with testing, there's several types of testing. What I'll show tonight is a form of what's called unit testing. So I'm testing my commandlets and functions, my custom commandlet that I created. But there's also such things as integration tests that can be used with Pester, and then other tests as well. So it's a pretty broad topic, and I have some opinions, and others have other opinions. Before for the last few years, and then I'll compare. I'll talk about the differences with Pester 5 and Pester 4, and some of the challenges that I have or had, and kind of still have just with using it. One of the main reasons I like Pester is it's PowerShell at the end of the day. So if you know PowerShell, you know Pester. So what I'll do here is I'll share my screen, and I'm hoping everybody can see VS Code. Yep, all good? Okay. So in here on the left side, I have a repository of the code that I talked about years ago. I'm going to go through that, kind of breeze through that, and then I'm going to talk about Pester 5. The problem with tests is that they're annoying to write, and it's annoying to write them in a way that you don't have to repeat yourself often. So Pester 5 enables some features that allows you to do things better. So with Pester, just kind of to highlight, that's really big. Is that still big enough? Everybody see? Okay, cool. I don't want to make it too massive, but so with Pester, there's a different way of writing it. So you have what's called a domain-specific language, or DSL, where you have describe, it, and context. And then with Pester 5, there's before all, before each, after all, after each, there's discovery, and so on. So what I want to show you is a function that I wrote called get airport. And this is what I wrote. I haven't done much with it. I don't think anything yet since 3 years ago. It's a simple function. It passes in a city, or you can give it a city, and I'm only checking on Raleigh or Phoenix. And if I give it Raleigh, then it's going to give me output of certain data, right? It's very simple. So if I let's see here, run this here.
So for some reason, they're seeing you, but not your shared screen.
Okay.
I see the shared screen. Yeah, I'm remote too. I can see it.
I see the shared screen.
Okay, thanks guys for chiming in.
Okay, cool. No worries. So this is my PowerShell function, get airport. So if I load it in here, so get airport, city, Raleigh, right? So there you go. And if I do get airport city, Phoenix, I think I have it in there. Yeah, there you go. So it's just a hash table of lookup. So you got the code, airline's name, blah, 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 right? So it's very simple, but it's static data, and I'm going to show you kind of how I used to test against it, and then how you can do it now. On the left side, you'll see I have files that include the name test in there. Those are the PowerShell scripts that I use that Pester looks for to run tests against. And if we start with the number 3 one, this was a pretty good test that I had before. What you'll notice is that what I'm doing up here is I'm dot sourcing the function, so I'm loading it into the session, and then I'm running this describe block right here. So what I'm doing here is I'm testing to see, and then it's kind of somewhat self-explanatory, hopefully. And this is Pester version 4, by the way. I won't go into 5 yet, but this is kind of what I'm showing beforehand. So I have basically give me the Raleigh airport code. So I run this describe. In the describe block, I have the actual, which gives me the output of that. And then I have an it block, which contains just a specific test to test against the name of the code, right? So I expect it to be RDU, and if I run this whole thing, I have to run it here. It should work. Okay. Probably because I didn't load this in, so let's try this instead. Okay. Well, that's fun. Probably because I installed Pester 5 and not Pester 4, so my test might fail. So that's fun. So I'm just going to explain this. And, this would have worked in Pester 4, but it's not working now because there's several things I need to fix in here. So
hold on, let's take a step back. The problem is not really you.
no,
The problem is the version from version 4 to version 5 has introduced breaking changes
correct.
to the language.
Correct.
And so this is a good example of existing code not working when we bring the modules forward.
But in line 11, what is the attribute code?
So this should be RDU, because if I look at get airport or Raleigh, the code should be
Okay, so that's the
RDU. Yeah. So this is broken right now. So this is a good example of a broken test that I need to somehow fix. And I can fix it here live, but I'm going to show you, yeah, how I fixed it. That's right. So there's a few things that are wrong here. Anything outside of the describe block, like out here, needs to be in another block. You can't just put anything you want outside of this. So Pester 5 introduced this concept called the for discovery. So what it is, I'm just going to actually show you this. So this is my new test here, and it's called should be test under Pester 5. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to dot source my function called get airport. But you see how I'm not putting this on a random line, like right here or right here. Pester is very specific about where it wants this code to be. So you'll start to pick up on where things go. But just so that if your code is spread out in different places with 4, when you go to Pester 5, it's going to scream at you and want you to put it in very specific places. So I'll break down what I've noticed myself, and then I'll kind of move on and answer what I can. I will say that I've only been using Pester 5 for like 6 months to a year. So if I don't know something, I'm going to say I don't know, and we can Google it together. So if I run this right here, so let me CD to the Pester 5, and down here is where I'm running my integrated terminal, and I'm on a Mac running PowerShell inside of my Mac. So just to give you a context of where I'm running this, right? So if I do invoke Pester, this should work. There you go. That worked. So what that did is that ran this describe block, and this before all basically said before any of these tests run, which right now I just have one, load this into the session. So if I didn't have this and I wanted to do this outside of here, it wouldn't work like you saw before. So if I go to the should be test right here, this screamed at me because I didn't have that wrapped in a before all or a before each block. So the before all block here says before all the tests start running, load this custom function into my test.
You're saying that there's a before all and there's a before each.
Correct. Yes. So before all the tests that I run, which is just one, here, load this function. There's also something called before each. So if you want to run a function or something here, so run stuff here, then that will be run before each test, right? So if I have, let's say I have like 5 tests in here, this is going to run 5 times. This is run once. Make sense?
So before each would be good for like clearing a variable.
Yeah, clearing a variable, or that's a really good example. There's a lot of use cases for before each, but for me, what I mostly have done myself is just use a before all block. I'll show in the other repo that I've been working on some new code that I used and I'll pass in some external data into that as well. But this is basically the biggest thing that I wanted to show you, the difference between Pester 4 and 5. It really wants you to put your code inside of a describe block, before all, before each, after all, after each. And the Pester documentation is really good. So check it out, but I learned by doing, so I may not do well in explaining it. You may pick it up by watching me do the things I'm doing and failing at them.
So you may have talked about this before. I think Pester comes in box on most Windows boxes today. Like Pester straight up inside of it.
Yep.
But Pester 5 is separate stuff. So Pester 4 is there automatically.
So
you need to import and install Pester 5.
Yeah, so that's a good question. So Phil's asking, how do you get Pester 5 onto your machine? So if you go home and go onto Windows 10 on your personal PC, you have Pester 3.7, 3.8, right? And there is a way to install Pester 5. What you'll have to do is if you go to the Pester site here, there is a process to install that. So it depends on on where you're at. So right here it says Pester version 3.4. Yeah, ships with Windows 10 in 2016. So it's not really going to work with the PowerShell Git. So the best way to do this is right here: install module Pester force, and there's also a way you can remove the built-in version, and then if you have PowerShell 5 or newer, and so on and so on. So this is really good documentation on how to get Pester onto your machine. But once you have it onto your machine, it's going to try to run Pester 5. Now, what some people do is they will actually not move the code to Pester 5. They'll just keep it on 4. So you can do what's called required version. So with install module, there is a required version string right here where you can pass in install module Pester required version 4.99.99, and it will lock it to a Pester 4 version. But this whole talk is getting you hopefully away from using Pester 4 to Pester 5 and explaining why you should do that.
Is this running on PowerShell 5 or PowerShell 7, or it doesn't matter?
It could run on Windows PowerShell. It can run on PowerShell. So it can run everywhere that PowerShell runs. And if I'm wrong, please chime in. I believe that's the case. I haven't run Pester on Ubuntu or non-Mac or non-Windows, so I don't know if that's actually the case. Or ARM, right? So I'd imagine that is the case.
It's the same PowerShell from Mac. So
yeah. And the
Well, it
side
looks like
of
you're
the
on the Mac anyway.
I am on the Mac. Yep.
Yeah, I think his statement was just about trying to determine if it's any different from Ubuntu. But once he's on Ubuntu, or Mac, he's on Ubuntu. It's the same bit from that.
Yeah. So this is a very, very basic, just set up right. So I just test one thing. It's not really a great test because I don't know, it could be better, but it's something. So here's one that I wrote that is pretty wild. So let's go to the top. So we're going to talk about airport code. I don't know why this is here. I think I just put that there. Before all, so remember before all of the tests, get the get the custom function right, because you have I've had issues importing custom modules and functions inside of Pester. So what I like to do in a before all block is bring them into the block itself. So this obviously this get airport is not a function built into PowerShell. So that's kind of the concept behind bringing it in and then using that every time. Does that make sense? I went fast there. That's why I'm doing this here. Before each test, it's going to run this command. So if I look down here, I have two tests down here, right? I have one where it checks the code is capitalized RDU, and I check that the phone number is this phone number. So what I'll do here is I've added some additional blocks, this after all and after each. So if I run this, let's see what happens. Okay. So here, let me clear my session. So basically what it did is that was fun test, what's next, that was fun test, what's next. So it put it there twice, because if we look here, after each test, run a write host, right? And then what it says here, it says, cool, I've finished all the tests. So here, let me bring that up again. I finished all the tests. That I finished all the tests runs after all tests inside of this describe block. Now, one thing that's different here, if you've used PowerShell or Pester 4, that's different than Pester 5. Pester 5 just gives you the output of the describe block working or not working. So for example, my tests, I have two tests here, but I don't know which one succeeded. I just know that they both succeeded, right? So there's functionality that you have to add into, and it gives you customization to add into to see which test succeeded or didn't succeed. But in this case, I don't have to worry about it, right? And then down here is the actual code itself. So let's fail it. Let's do 214. So let's go up here. So what I did is I gave it the wrong phone number. So this is my test that failed. All right, so I don't see the one that passed. I just see the one that failed. And you can customize this, and I'll show this later. Right, I'll show this in about 10 minutes. But this is a very simple, hey, I expected this, but it was that. And if you've never used Pester before, this is what you see when a test fails in the console. You can also output the Pester results to different formats that get ingested into GitHub Actions or Jenkins or whatever other CI tool that you use. So Pester, but in this case, I'm just simply printing it to the screen. Give me what happened. Does that make sense so far? Are we tracking so far about what this?
Not that
So with this, I like seeing the test that succeeded. So I'm gonna kind of go fast. I'm not gonna go fast, but I'm gonna go a little bit crazy and show you what Pester's introduced. So Pester's introduced what's called a Pester configuration. Pester configuration allows you to customize the a lot of different things about Pester, how you want it to treat it. So in this case, I want it to give me the detailed output of all tests, whether they succeeded or not. This is actually a bad example because this is not going to work because I haven't defined container anywhere. Yeah. Let me go. Let me come back to this.
So while you're figuring that out, let me just come back around, and you already know this, John. But there's a gentleman who was unable to attend in person, is looking forward to the recording, and put some comments in his meetup, and he had a couple of questions. He said, I came across several projects that use a separate tests.ps1 file and a separate Azure DevOps pipeline to perform the tests. Is it possible to start small and include tests within your script file or your functions? That's his first question. Can the tests be in the code themselves? And I don't think so.
No, the
Right?
tests
They'll be
are
separate files.
yeah, the tests are separate, so they're named really similarly to how these are. So function dot test dot ps1 because Pester looks this is that example as a whole, but it looks for this test file. So it's better to break out one test per function.
Okay.
So let me pause there too, is that you have all these test.ps1 files in this folder, and you've been in as probably working at this point, you've said invoke Pester this particular PS1 file, test.ps1 file.
Right.
If you simply said invoke Pester on that folder, it would do them all.
It would normally do them all, but it's going to fail because I have Pester 5.
Well,
That's it.
because of those tests will fail because those tests are not.
Correct.
But if you had, hey, in the test folder, typically would just in your CI/CD is to say invoke Pester to that folder, and it would just run all those tests in that folder.
Right.
And then go from that folder.
Now there's specific things that you can do to kind of customize that, and I'll talk about that a little bit. So what Phil's saying is if you want to run all these tests at once, like there's a way to do that. But for sometimes when you want to run a test that's against a specific describe block, like you want to test that the website's online, but not everything else, you can add tags to Pester. You can add these things that can skip this. So if you have a test that's not working, you can say skip or things like that. So while you can run all of these at once, and you should at the end of the day, don't expect them all to work all of a sudden when you have different scenarios that happen. This is just me saying, hey, I'm going to do one. This is my chronological order of how I presented before. But in that case, you can point it to all these test files, but I wouldn't do that yet.
So you could even tag your test and say this is production test and then this dev test. So you can have all your production tests sitting in the same folder where all your dev stuff is, and then you run your tests over and over again for dev. Going, okay, I'm not going to test them when I'm ready to test what production is, then I can just run those tests and validate that they're the same.
You can, but here's the problem with that. You have multiple tests for multiple environments, and you want to have one test work at every environment each time. So the only thing that changes between your environment is your data, right? So the concept around that is how do you feed Pester external data without having multiple tests per environment? Because you're not going to have, it's hard to have a prod.test.ps1, dev.test.ps1, QA.test.ps1. So the concept is
not a good idea to do just what I said.
correct. The concept is well, I understand the logic makes sense, but the concept is you want to keep everything as simple as you can, but also pass in data that's consistent within each of your testing scenarios. And for me, I'll show you how that works a little bit later. You use an external file or external source to pass that into your test and run them each time. So what I've showed you so far has really been just running against a single function. So let me jump over to my Pester 5 code that I worked on a little bit more before this, because this will show you some more things. So,
And so Jonathan, would you mind if I just did the next question? Because I think
yes, please.
So the next question that person asked, and I'm going to paraphrase a little bit here, and it says, anything considered if I want to test Azure Runbooks, and then it goes on to say, meaning PS scripts inside Azure Automation. So I think the question is generally like, how do I do Pester if I want to do it in Azure using Azure Automation?
As long as you have something that runs PowerShell and Pester, then you can test. So it's not a matter of whether it's an Azure Automation or not. It's a matter of will Pester run and will PowerShell run, and if they will both run, then and you could save it to disk somewhere, then it'll work. So where you run it from isn't as relevant as your tests are and your data, where you get your data from, right? So you may be running Azure Automation to run your scripts. So you may want to also use that to run your test, but it doesn't matter really where you want it from. the common place to run Pester is in a CI/CD pipeline as you're working on publishing a PowerShell script or module, or you're deploying a VM or something like that.
And so I was chatting with someone in a separate conversation, and I don't know if this was covered 100%, but so the premise here is basically every time your code changes, you're going to pump in this external data and tests.
You can, right? You can. It's easier.
To make sure that that code, those tests still validate against your new code that you're trying to push to production. That's essentially the idea, right?
Yeah.
I write new code and I want to test it before I release it. And so I have these tests that I run over and over again. And every time I make new code that goes live or about to go live, I want to run tests again, just so I have some sanity to say, I know all my tests that I designed work, so this should be good code.
So for example, one of the things that I do, my new gig is we're deploying Windows 10 and Windows 11. So I want to deploy both of them in the same way. So I'm going to write Pester test to make sure an image that I created for both Windows 10 and Windows 10 ARM and Windows 11 and Windows 11 ARM, so 4 images, are all consistently giving me the same data back. So as I'm doing that, I'm going to be writing Pester test against the images themselves. So the concept is those images all contain different data, but the same test should run. 7-zip is going to get installed on every Windows 10, Windows 11 image that we build. XYZ binary is going to get installed in every test, everything that we do. The difference is going to be the image or the data that gets thrown into there. Does that make sense? Your test shouldn't change. What should change is the data you feed into it.
Okay.
I don't think that's at least been my experience.
Yeah.
As
That
I've
would make sense.
tried to write tests for everything, because if you write it for a specific environment, you're going to break your other environments unless you write that test 5 more times, right? So here's my function again. Just brought it over. Get airport. But what I have here is I have a function called invoke integration test. So I hope this meme isn't like drawing the owl for like 2 circles and then like in the next slide it's like the owl's done, like it's painted by the artist. That's super. You know that meme?
Yeah,
like,
that's my favorite one.
you know, it's like, hey, here's this, and then boom, here's this function that wraps Pester and all a bunch of other nonsense.
Right.
But what I want to do is kind of show you what I've come up with as a wrapper around invoking Pester, because it's so powerful. Though this is something specific that I like to use in order for me to test Pester without multiplying or making new tests. And before I go here, though, I'm actually going to go into my integration tests themselves, and you're going to see some new stuff here. So this is my test, integration.test.ps1, and I have a param block up here, which is new, right? So you have the file and you have a path to script, and before discovery is going to run, it's going to get the date. It's going to store the contents of the file. I'm going to pass in here. You'll see where this comes in later. And each time it's going to run, let's see here, 1, 2 describe blocks, each with a context and int block. And each time it's going to dot source the path to the script, right? So it's going to get airport. And then what's going to happen is it's going to loop through the data that I give it and actually test to make sure that the website is online. So remember, my function is just 2 airports, right? It's Raleigh and it's Phoenix. But Raleigh and Phoenix share the same. They both have a website, right? So I'm not going to write a test that hard codes the city dot website every time. I'm going to feed it in something consistent, right? So if I look at airport.json, I have a JSON file that has city.Raleigh.Phoenix. So I'm passing in this JSON file into get airport, and I'm going to pass it into city, and each time it's going to give me different data that I should expect the same thing. So if I go back to integration.tests, well, this is the website, right? So website, sure, website. I don't know why I did that. But my context is going to be this little weird thing right here. All right, so this is the hardest part of Pester 5, in my opinion. So what you would normally do is you'd write it, Raleigh, it, Phoenix, it, whatever else, right? And that's complicated. That's you don't have to do that because you're testing the website every time, right? So what this script does is this takes in this data file, .city, and remember, .city, and it's going to be two values, Raleigh and Phoenix. So it's going to go through data.city, and this is going to print out Raleigh's website is online, Phoenix website online. It's going to do what's called an integration test. So this is an integration test where this is technically doing several things. Loading my function get airport with city $_ and $_ is just the value of what I gave it, which is Raleigh and then Phoenix. All right. So what this is going to do, this is actually going to run two tests because I pass in two cities. And if I go here down to the airport code, I'm going to dot source the function again, right? Which I can customize. I can customize this however I want to. I'm just using a parameter just to show you. I could hard code this and say here it is right here. But then I'm going to do the I'm going to loop through each of the two cities as well, and I'm going to make sure they only have 3 characters. So I'm going to get the code from the get airport city, so RDU or PHX, and I'm going to use a function called measured object, which is built into PowerShell to get the amount of characters it has, and it should be 3. So these are technically, I just wrote 8 tests in 30, 40 lines of code. And not only did I write those tests, I wrote it once. So I can customize my function to support additional cities and just feed Pester multiple cities without modifying my code. This is the power of Pester 5 that you weren't really able to do with Pester 4. Is feed in additional data externally. And there's a terminology for this. I think it's called container. So if you come here, you look at container. So there you go. Pester 5 supports running test files and script blocks using input. So what this does is you can run the container, give it the test file, and then give it the file, get emoji.ps1. This is kind of a bad example, but here's another thing. Right, so pass in a script block and do this. It gets crazy, but a container basically allows you to feed in external data into the test without you having to rewrite the test over and over. So there's a container and then there's config, right? So, but back to here, this is basically what I'm going to walk through. So this is my test, right? 4 discovery, 2 describe blocks, and that's it. So
can I pause there a second?
Yes, that was a lot. That was like drawing the aisle like crazy. But yeah, let's back up and see.
So
let's talk about it.
So looking directly at that code, and I think one of the points is like this is the real crazy thing when the open arrow, underscore lowercase arrow.
Isn't that crazy?
But that is effect. Am I correct in coming back to that is the $_ of Pester size.
Yes.
And then right behind it is that for each where so that is the array that you're going to pass it.
Right.
And so it could be a whole other thing. And so it is exactly what that is. And so that can actually be a bunch of stuff actually too. Are you saying too? Is that I could loop through just even data, and then I could then pull out the city and all that kind of stuff. It was if the input data is a bigger construct. Yeah. So kind of to that point. So it effectively is that object, right? I'm correct in that assumption. So like you said with the container, it was containerizing. And so this is a different version of that container where the container is the loop, is the context, and where the for each is it looping through those containers.
Correct. Yeah.
And so there's some other structures there, right? Beyond that can do work.
Yeah.
Beyond for each.
Yeah, this is a very simple. Well, so the for each is the powerful This was, I think, this is a replacement for test suite. I forget what the parameter name was with Pester 4, but this right here, I'm telling you guys, this was the hardest for me to wrap my head around. Like, how do I grab individual or objects or strings or hash tables and pass them into a test within a single describe block with one test? Have it work over and over and over and over and over. And this is it. This is how you do it. This is the way that I've found to do it.
So effectively going back to that idea of dev versus prod and stuff like that. And so the Pester test itself, this entire using the same test, and then the input that you give it is your dev environment data versus your prod environment data. So hey, here's a bunch of server names at that point. There's all your dev servers. Here's all your prod server names, and go from there. But then it can be this crazy JSON object that has, here's your dev servers with the dev SQL boxes, with dev SQL tables, and here's the the shares that we need to match, and then we'll repeat the same thing. And I know exactly what prod is, and I know exactly what dev is, and you're testing effectively the same thing.
Correct. Yes.
Without knowing that, well, with guaranteeing that you're not changing anything from one environment to the other.
Correct. Yeah. The data will change.
Well,
right?
Yeah.
But the server name, the servers will, it does the same thing. It's just different data, right? Between environments.
So based on what you were just saying, Phil, would I run my data that I'm using in dev and prod when I get data that changes? So let's say
So just
I have HR that updates data every 2 weeks or something, right? Would I then run the new version of the data through my tests in prod? And then when it passes all the tests, then I know there's no problems with that data, not just my code, but also that data, right? It's not going to throw out errors because there's no
Yeah, I guess it could.
spaces, And then once it passes my test, then I say, okay, I feel comfortable running it in prod.
That's an interesting use case, even to say, hey, somebody's giving me this just random data, and you could write tests and say, hey, I'm going to validate that data ahead of time.
Yeah, I'm just showing you a static file that I grabbed and just pre-configured to include the two things here. But this is only something that's static that I created on purpose for this function. It's hyper simple. But you can take in data from external locations, like I'm doing here. Let's say you have a REST endpoint that has your CMDB that contains all of your servers with all of your environments, with all of your applications installed. You can run this here, grab that data, and then loop through it as I'm doing here, right? You don't have to hard code it to look for a specific file like I have. You can bring it in dynamically this way. And this is PowerShell. This is not anything more than PowerShell with Pester. The biggest thing, though, again, the biggest thing that I did not figure out and just really had a hard time with is this looping, this for each block right here. The for each block and the before discovery and then the before all and the after all and all that stuff. I probably can do it better here. Like, I don't know if I can do this path to script and have it work with both describe blocks, but I just left it at that. Does that make sense so far what I'm doing? Because I'm going to run this in a second. I just want to make sure everybody kind of
change it back.
So the less than underscore greater than is a built-in thing.
Yeah, okay, so
Or
this
that
is
string what you came up with as your for each item.
so this right here, this object, actually let me go here. The current item in the provided array is represented by the pipe. It can be found by using this right here.
So can you use that in your code, or you can use it only in?
No, this is
describe?
a Pester test.
So the fact that it's in the describe, so you can kind of see it's outside of those curly braces. So in it's in the description of the blocks themselves. So that's where you would use the $_, but it's not visible out of that scope.
Correct.
So whatever, I don't know, open arrow, close arrow, underscore.
Sorry.
That's the structure.
Data-driven test. The data-driven test is what I was kind of getting at. That's the really key thing here, right? Yeah, this can range from providing multiple examples or a single it, right? External configuration file for each test cases, right? So it's wild stuff. Like this, once I got it, I was like, oh, that makes sense. again, the documentation, I mean, spend time here, but it is worth it, especially if you haven't used Pester 4. Like, this is great. This is going to be a lot, I wouldn't say a lot easier, but it's not going to give you as much of a headache as it was. And again, I mean, Jakob and the other folks that contributed did a great job. It's just for me, I had a really hard time breaking the concept around what I should do with Pester 4 versus Pester 5. But the thing that did it for me is the data-driven test and writing simple, single described tests that run against multiple things without having to write all these tests because it gets complicated. Right. So let's run this, see what happens. Actually, I'm going to take this. I'm going to do something even cooler. This is going to fail hard. If I just do invoke Pester against this, it's going to be like, no, it's not going to work because I'm passing in external data right here, right? So this is where things get interesting. And what I did is I made a wrapper around Pester, and I just called it invoke integration test. And what I did is I gave it several. So again, this is just a PowerShell function that I made, and I call wrapper around a few Pester features for 5. In my scenario, I pass in a test suite, website, or code. If I don't pass a test suite in, because remember, website, code, okay. If I don't pass in a test suite, just run the whole thing. My file is my file, right? So I'm passing in my external file or data, and then my tests are where my tests live. Like, hey, run it here. And then I have a switch that says CI, which CI will output the test to an XML file that can get ingested into GitHub Actions, Jenkins, and so on. Gives you pretty graphs, right?
So you installed
It's wild.
this-
It's crazy. So please ask questions because this took a long time for me.
Well, let's take a second and go back. You had said, I can't run this, it's going to fail because there's data being imported.
Yes.
Why would that fail? Because the file is in your path there, right? So
But Pester doesn't know about external data unless you tell it, hey, I'm giving you external data. That external data is what's called a Pester container. A Pester container says, okay, I'm going to store this container. It's a new Pester container. Okay, where's your path? It's right here. All right, what's your data? What are you passing into the container, which is another word for data-driven test that you're going to give it? Well, I'm going to pass it in a hash table of file to file. Now, file, right here, this is this. All right, so my parameter I reuse right here.
Go down on it.
All right, so containers, here we go, store this container. Then I'm going to build a config file for Pester. So there's a Pester configuration. This is also very new with Pester because you can do a lot of things. But again, this is external data. This is just store the data in a config variable. And this says, okay, if I pass in a test suite right here, website or code, then I want you to build my config file to config filter tag equals test suite, config filter tag. Now you're like, okay, how did you know what these values were? Well, I just looked on here. So if I look up configuration options, these will give you configuration options that allow you to pass in additional data. It'll give you the verbosity. Remember I talked about earlier how if I run 8 tests, it's only going to show me, hey, you have 8 tests that succeeded. Well, you may want to have multiple tests show you, so you can give it different verbosity. You can pass through to another object. You can skip. You can do all kind of stuff within a configuration, right? So this is a more advanced use of Pester, but I'm using that here because, again, if I want to run my integration test, but only against the website portion of my tests, then I can just run this function with test suite website, and it's going to connect here. Now, if I don't put that, it's just going to skip. All right, so if test suite's there, nothing. Okay, if CI is there, then I want you to. I'll go to this later. I'll skip this. This is complicated. Else, do I need an else? I don't know if I need an else. I don't know. So container. So if I have a config, how do I have the container in the config? Like, how do I tell my Pester configuration? Okay, feed in external data. What I do is I feed it in here. So remember, my config file is just stored up here. I'm just adding to a hash table essentially. And then line 64 says, okay, output the tests one at a time, right? If there's 8, show me 8. If there's 16, show me 16. All right. So what should happen, if I've done this right, I should be able to do this. Yep. So Invoke integration test suite. Now again, this function right here, this is a custom function I wrote that gives me the ability to identify a test suite, bring in an external file, test, and so on. So I basically was like, okay, just run my test suite website for my code for my function get-airport. And look what it did. It said, okay, I found 4 tests. I filtered on tag, set to website, and it did that because I gave it config.filter.tag equals test suite, and test suite was up here, which was up here. So it gave me, it only ran describe block website. And look, it says Raleigh's website's online, Venus website online, and it gave me all that information because I told it at the very end, hey, give me the detailed output of each test that I'm running, and not just, hey, you just ran 2. And look, it even tells me I didn't run two of these. So if I just take this off, this should run all of them. Yep. So that is Pester 4, Pester 5, some different concepts of external data with testing and things like that.
And so you were talking about,
It's crazy, it's wild, but I love this. This is so fun.
in previous ones, we talked about like using Pester, sort of like test your infrastructure as code. So that's an example right there where you can have a source file and you can run tests, just check whether the website is up or down.
Yeah, actually, I did
return.
both. Actually, that's good. That's a good point, Mike. I actually ran 2 types of tests here. I did one test that is integration tests. So I have to go somewhere else outside of the code to give me the result that I expect. The website, just do a ping or invoke REST call. And then I did a test that actually checks the code internally. I don't need internet to run the bottom half. I need internet to run this. This is integration testing. This is unit testing.
But well, let's say it a different way. You only need internet to run the first 2 because you're testing
reaching out.
internet has set resource.
Yeah,
If it was a
going out.
local thing,
Right.
it would run.
Correct.
Yeah.
So what I tried to do is run some tests on my Mac. That was pretty wild. I don't have it working yet, but I can also show you how I'm working on it. But essentially, I was trying to do the same thing where I was trying to get. I have Homebrew, and Homebrew is a package repository for Mac OS that runs, and I have different wild things here that I tried to recreate. Because honestly, I wrote this test. I wrote these tests, and I was like, "Wow, this is crazy! I can't believe this works." But I'm gonna save this for later because I need to keep this in mind when running multiple tests on or multiple data files and external resources and servers with single test here. So, yeah, that's it. That's all I really have. If there's questions, I mean, feel free to ask. Yeah, go ahead.
So back when Python made a breaking change when they changed how strings behaved between single and double quotes. They actually had a module or submodule to run against your code and kind of translate some of that. Did Pester 5 provide that with the where they expected the blocks differently? Do you know?
I do not know, but it would be something that PS Script Analyzer would be able to figure out?
Probably. You're right.
Because if you're looking at the data inside of that, that sounds like a custom PS Script Analyzer rule.
The syntax of
don't-
that, yeah.
I don't know if Pester can be used for that natively.
Okay.
But then again, if you write a custom function to test that a file is single or multi-line or whatever other thing you want to test, then the answer is yes.
So does Pester support or give you access to regular expressions? I was thinking to have an airport code that is 3 uppercase letters would be a nice, simple, regular expression pattern.
Yeah, just if PowerShell supports it, then you can test it.
So if that fashion, what it is right there on line, 25, it's just the regular expression. Does this validate? Should be blah blah blah. And so, or now you can go back down to line 38. So that line of code is the validation regular expression.
No, this is the just saying, is it 3 characters? This is not saying if it's
No, but you could do a validation. The regular expression, it's uppercase, and then should be true.
You say run the regex to grab what you want, and then
You
run
could
the
do
test
a,
on-
you could
Yeah,
do a,
should- And then
what is,
dollar
iMatch.
underscore dot exactly. Yeah. Or 2 upper. Yeah,
what is it?
2 upper. That's it.
Oh, is it just 2 upper?
But do you need to? Is the dollar underscore the same on both sides of the should?
It's dollar underscore on the same size, both sides as it should. I don't know the answer.
It's on the other side of the pipe. See, there's a pipe there in the middle between. the
Yeah,
should.
oh, I see what you're saying. So is this type this over? Yes. Let's run it. Let's try it. I don't know. So I just added a third one, uppercase. Oh wait, I'm testing the
Oh,
code.
you did city.
I did city. Okay, so I need to do.
No, it's still city, but. Oh, you did dollar underscore. You did. So line 51, it's dollar underscore dot code.
So my code is the 3 lines. I thought here. So it should
Yeah.
be all capital. But why is it saying?
But
It-
dollar,
you need to
do-
dollar underscore is the object.
Because
need to
your two upper isn't on the code. Your two upper is on the dollar underscore.
you need, don't you need to do get airport dash code instead of city?
Yes.
Line 51.
Or no,
Dash.
No, actually, so line
So the
right
city
here,
brings it
do
in.
dollar upper equals that whole thing again,
Oh,
and then
no, you don't want to force it to upper there.
no, that's right, because I'm testing the
so
output
if you
of the
make
function
it a
itself.
variable right before it, and then just validate it's exactly what the one. So you force it to upper, and then validate that it is upper.
It has nothing to do with the upper lower. It has to do with the fact that you're looping on city, but you're getting a result back of code, and the city is never going to match the code.
So no, so go back to where you dot code. Yeah, put that up on the right there. Dollar upper. Dollar up. Go back.
Remember, this is the city.
That's the city.
This is Raleigh,
Yeah.
right, or Phoenix, right here. So if I run this, this is going to be the whole output. Is the whole output here,
Mhm.
right? If
Dot
I want just
code.
the code. So if I
Dot
do
code.
Wait, on the line 51 dot code. Line 51 dot code.
Dot code.
I can do that.
Yeah. And
Is
then
code
you
that
could
up?
say dollar code to upper.
No, so
I don't think that'll
no,
work.
not the dollar underscore, not the dollar, not dollar underscore,
Why did they expect Phoenix?
because that dollar underscore is the name.
Be exactly dollar code to
Dollar
upper.
code to upper.
Down one.
On line 52. Yeah, that's it.
No.
Yes.
Yes.
Is it?
Yeah.
Isn't it? Hang on.
You're making me feel
Yep.
much better about my coding skills.
Yeah, the fact that you're using code in multiple times, so that the code should be the upper version of that code. So the value of dollar code, call it something, no, is the
No,
code value.
no, code is fine.
Well, it's,
This.
and
Yeah, but that's not gonna.
Yeah.
here, I actually like the idea of, do we read before? So
Dollar airport equals get airport city. And then airport dot
This works.
code in 52.
well, it works, and
It works. I don't know if it's. So this is the kind of thing that I run into constantly when I do this. It's like it works, but is this portable? Will this work as I expect it to? All right, let's try it. Let's modify the code to be lowercase, and let's rerun this. All right, there you go. It expected capital, so that works. So let's do it again for down here. Let's see if that works. There you go. My code, my tests work as I didn't expect them to, or now expect them to, with a room full of genius people.
And you'd
Other
want
people
to
know,
change
no, to the left, no, down, up.
and you'd want to change the name of that particular test to uppercase instead of only 3 characters.
Oh, yeah, gotcha. There you go.
Yep.
Now, if I look here,
That-
actually, let's
Your expressions.
CI run that. Well, let's just open that up. So this is what you can feed into. This is what you can feed into a CI tool, and this will pick it up and will tell you, give you a nice GUI graph for the 6 tests that succeeded. And I think if you run this inside of actions, there you go. I think it'll actually do it for you, where Pester supports CS specific output. Yeah, there you go. I don't know how this works though, because this is a new feature in 5.3. So if you're running your code in Azure DevOps or GitHub Actions, then it will read that it's somehow in. There we go. It reads your environment variables for Azure DevOps, and then if you GitHub Actions, it reads Pester reads your environment variables called GitHub Actions, and then it will output that to a file, I believe. Yeah, output. Yeah, CI format. So I can do verbosity, which is just throw it in the screen, so I can look at it in my logs, or pre-logs, because it's green. This is green, so that's another thing you need to make sure of your CI tool supports that. Or I can run this inside of GitHub Actions, and it's my output would be where's my function? My custom function over here. My output would be not here. It would be something else. I don't know. I'd have to customize this because right here I'm hard coding it. I'm hard coding the name of the XML file and so on. So, yeah, it's insane how many custom options there are here. But again, the docs are really great for how you want to understand how this works. Because yeah, this actually wasn't a feature. I don't think this was a specific feature until 5.3, and I wrote this without knowing that that feature exists. So, because I was just like, oh, just export it as an XML file, not knowing that if I ran this, it would actually pick it up and do it for me. Yeah, see, 2 months ago. So.
Cool.
Yeah. Any other questions about Pester, its use case? How I just added what's this?
Well, I kind of wanted to ask.
13 lines of code and tested it just on the fly. Like,
well, I
it's
kind of
awesome.
also, I primarily, because I think this is a great topic, and I think you did a really good job explaining some of it. And I know there are some people in chat and also on here that have done things before that. And, you know, these Clement, he's chiming in again, is if you want to kind of share with some of, you know, what other people have done with Pester and really some of the value points, and if people who are fairly new with Pester or, you know, thinking of use cases that here, this is what I use it for. And, you know, I think you've described some of what you're doing it and give an example of how you use Pester. It's almost like thinking outside the box in ways in which you can use it. And hey, I've used it, and thinking that, hey, I can use it for that too as well. So you know what I'm saying?
I do. I think I have in my old code something where it'll tell you. Where do I have that? Hang on. There's a piece of code where I have a start process to like 5 different links that talk about what I used to. Sorry,
Well, I'm going to call out Clem. You know, you'd mentioned in chat there, Clem, about you know, using it to validate desired state configuration to ensure, you know,
Yes.
config drift. Like, can you talk a little bit more about that, or some examples of, you know, how it's been valuable to you?
So we have what I'll call infrastructure suite of tests, and one of the things that is mandatory within our compliance security hardening is ensuring that the default root account on, say, a given appliance is disabled, right? And but we have admins that periodically need to break glass and use that root account to do troubleshooting, debugging, restarting of something. And periodically they would forget to go back and re-disable the account. So we created a series of Pester tests that run through like a baseline hardening compliance check. Is this account disabled? Is the password length still 19 characters? Are we using uppercase? Are we doing 3 lowercase? What's our password policy look like? For IIS, you know, similar thing. You know, we wrote a hardening document that installs IIS using PowerShell. Well, because PowerShell is great, but PowerShell doesn't really, it's not idempotent. So it's not going to guarantee your results unless you check them yourself. So we use Pester to help with some of that idempotency check to make sure that what we think we have just set using PowerShell actually got set by going out, doing whatever it is we need to do on a box, and then running a Pester test that goes out, queries that box, compares that result that comes back to the known good configuration file that we would have in like a JSON format. Does that give an idea?
Yeah, it gives me some ideas to how I can use it better. So that's kind of.
It's just validating that what you think is happening should happen in any scenario that you presented, right?
Right. And
that's a famous use case of integration test, because I've done this in the past and created a VM. Well, every VM had to have 16 different agents and in a specific subnet, blah, blah, blah. He's using it with DSD. You can use it with a new AD user. I mean, there's just so many use cases that while beneficial, that I don't think a lot of people are really understanding its use case, because It's one thing to run it and say, oh, it succeeded, like put a try catch. Okay, cool, move on. But actually validate that it's actually done at the very end, like test dash AD user exist. That's the power of Pester. It gets you thinking about how to test code or test something that should be declarative and make sure it is, right? Whether it's a tool like, Ansible, Puppet, Terraform, all these config. I mean, you can layer this on top of that. And even in PS Summit of 2020, there's a talk that Chris, what's his name, at Stack Overflow talked about. They use Pester, PowerShell, and Terraform to spin up and tear down Azure environments. And then I'm showing on the screen a semi-popular. So everybody, a lot of people might know about DBA tools, which is a very popular module for SQL administration. There's another function, or there's a module called DBA checks, which basically uses Pester to confirm and validate that SQL is configured as it should with best practice. So there's a lot of popular use cases for this. I think some of them are moving to PowerShell 5, so that's some of the challenge. Is all the tests are probably written in Pester 5, so the tests might be written in Pester 4. I'm just showing you this to give you an example of the usefulness of a tool like Pester, which is just PowerShell, and your ability to do whatever you want with it.
And kind of going off what Jonathan said before, one of the other things that we use it for is there are known configuration differences between our environments, whether it's a couple of fields, dev versus prod, or whether it's version 14 versus version 15. I have basically the same test, but I will have two context blocks inside of that test. One will be tagged as version 15, the next will be tagged as version 16, and nothing more will change but the expected output, right? So if I'm looking for like an ISO image value of an EC2 instance that we're using in AWS, and I know it's supposed to be 1, 2, 3, 4 on my dev environment, but it's supposed to be 5, 6, 7 on my prod, I can have one test file with two different context items inside of it doing essentially the same thing, but looking for just a slightly different value, and then tag them. And in the Pester configuration that he was showing before, I could just use like an include tag to say, I only want to test for version 14 when I run this set of tests. And now I only want to test for version 15. And I can get a better idea of, how out of compliance are we at a version level or at an environment level using those tag features.
Well, that's great. There's so many use cases for it. I mean, I can put this, some of the links that I found in my research, but I mean, here's a blog of someone running tests against VMs and Azure SQL databases in Azure using Pester, right? And it's just a bunch of Azure specific functions inside of Pester. I mean, it's just wild how much you can do here.
So let's go back a bit because you guys are really talking about good and interesting stuff. But so if I've never used Pester and I want to get started, where do I start? So I mean, obviously documentation, I understand that. But what's a good sort of test to try to go for? Like, where's a good area that I might want to consider running tests against?
So for
Some
your
examples that you can
particular
show.
for your particular instance, Mike, I would say, some very common tests against your Active Directory infrastructure. Right.
So I understand that. Okay.
But as far as like, how do I create my very first test? Is that what you're
Well,
asking?
I'm just thinking like, Jermaine is sitting here next to me, and I'm not picking on Jermaine. I'm just using an example. Jermaine's like, wow, this is great. I want to go back to the office and get started on this. Like, what would I use this for? I'm trying to like spur some ideas for the
What do you-
audience.
so
These are some
let me
common
let me
things.
spin this around. How do you use PowerShell? And then when you use PowerShell, you're doing something. You're outputting something, you're returning something, you're testing something. It's the same question of what are you using PowerShell at work? Okay, what can you test against at work? Sorry, I'm cutting someone off. Go ahead.
But it's all about the result, right? You're writing a function that produces a result, and you need to test what that result is. And it may be a value that it's returned, or it may be an artifact that it created, and you got to go look at that artifact.
So did you happen to run a report today and you found a field that you said, how the heck did that get in there?
Yeah, or even to your example of like before, hey, somebody gives you some validation of data. Like, hey, we talked recently, like, hey, I know how to, import a in a CSV or Excel document, and I know, hey, how to grab the value from, column 1. But hey, make sure that column 1 doesn't exceed 12 characters, or some other validation. Like, hey, make sure that everybody in this file is in 80, or kind of thing like that. The test can do just that.
You guys very quickly turn this around to, here's what you should do, Mike. And I didn't say asking for a friend in
No.
me. I just was trying to give some examples of what may spur our audience to
I have
think
an
of
example.
use cases for them to start at work.
Those were use cases
Right.
that we know you would do,
Yeah.
and the idea too is that I think the idea of just even like desired state to Hunt's point, like it'd be really nice to know, like, hey, is the page file too big on the following servers?
Holy shit, that's a great one.
Just,
For us-
just something simple
for
like
us-
that.
Yeah, for us, we have CIS and STIG is another STIG. Those are two very, common audit security guidance sort of things that we get asked about, right? So, just going out, finding the CIS benchmark for a thing, whether it's Palo Alto, whether it's a Linux box, whether it's a Windows server, and then breaking that down into smaller categories like, specifically Active Directory or Windows IIS, and then taking those subcategories and saying, okay, now I'm just going to write a simple test that says I'm going to compare what is expected in the security hardening guideline with what we currently have on our machine. Is our SSH security where we expect it to be, right? Or do we have a backdoor that could be exploited? Is something that would be there. SSL certs are another one. Yeah, any of those types of things. And another like common troubleshooting, dealing with like web hosting, our development teams will always say, well, it's not our code, it's the server. And it's got to be one server is different than the other. Well, okay, I'm going to run the same test against both servers, and I should get the same 50 results back that match on both sides. And now I throw it back to the development group and say, nope, my boxes are identical. Here's my proof. Show me your code, and let's dig into that a little bit more.
That gets uncomfortable.
So another question that Tim actually asked in chat, though, I'm going to put back to you there, Jonathan, is that do you have any examples just in your demo as far as mocking and doing any of that stuff? Or no? I know, I don't know if you would have any examples there, but he just asked, hey, are we going to do any mocking? And that is another concept for people who are new to Pester overall. Can you just talk about a little bit about mocking? Maybe if you don't have a whole thing.
Yeah, so I'm not good at mocking, but the concept is, how do I take a existing function and output something very specific that it wouldn't normally output, and test that it actually works. Hang on. Let me just.
While he's figuring
Yeah,
that
there we
out.
go. Fake dependencies to verify behavior. I don't have an example of mocking. That is a very advanced thing that I have not done yet.
Well, I think a good example in the idea of mocking is the idea where I first saw it was, hey, I want to validate that an AD user is kind of stuff. So inside your it block is get AD user blah 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 is the current, but there's no way to validate that on the fly, in a real test if you're not giving it real data. So you could effectively make an AD object on the kind of fake one, and then in your test you can actually have one. So it's not actually pinging AD raw. You're not giving it AD directly. So it's kind of like creating these objects if it's coming on the fly.
Yeah, mocking is a whole section that I personally have not done before.
Okay.
But again, Jakob has a really great article or piece on that. But no, I do not know the answer to that question. I don't either. I don't want to tell you something wrong. I just say, let's go here and check it out.
Adrian, I don't know if it's the best practice. I can tell you how I approach that. I
Alright,
have
so the question is, Clem, the question was,
the question in the chat is, what is the best approach for handling the need for credentials? And, before I run a test, I need to authenticate to the endpoint. What I have done is I have defined a credential in my invoke script as a parameter, and I feed that into the Pester container, which is part of the Pester configuration. And then that gets passed over to the test files. And when I in my case, I'm doing an invoke REST method within the external test itself, and I can just pass the PS credential object then to my test in the before all section of the test, which then allows me to authenticate to the REST API that I'm doing my test against.
Hey, Mike, do you want to answer how you would do it?
I love secret management. So,
but I think Clem's answer is perfect. It's
It
just
is.
the idea of
And you can
abstracting out
create that
credentials.
credential object however you want, right? You could pull it from secrets management. You could use an environment, which I don't recommend as your management. You could create that as an input on your CLI command, right? When you do invoke pester dash credential and then give it your credential. There's any numerous way of doing it. It's really more about how do I pass that PS credential to my test so that I can then use it in that test to do the authentication, against the devices. And you can also loop through multiple devices that way. It works fairly well.
Depending on where you run your code, your CI tool might have a integrated way to inject a secret into your test as it's running too. So I just looked up GitHub's version of how to use a environment secret. While not recommended to use it as an environment variable, there is a way to do it within different CI tools that they suggest and use. But again, that's my world. So there's also a lot of different opinions on that, but Clem has a great point too.
Yeah, and I don't, just to be clear, I don't at this point we're not mature enough in our particular environment to do a lot within the pipelines within Git or within Azure DevOps. Most of what I'm doing is, just straight PowerShell that I'm running off of my workstation, and then I'm going out and grabbing my secret to make Mike happy. I actually do grab my secret out of Secrets Manager to create my PS credential, which I have on my box. So definitely ways.
You can also use Mozilla SOPs as well, which I'm using quite a bit.
Shameless plug.
Shameless plug.
So Phil, I had a better question. How has Clem been coming to meetings for almost 2 years and not been on the calendar as a presenter?
I don't know.
I don't
I
know,
think
'cause
that there's a great opening.
That's a lot of bullshit
in
that I
November.
hear coming out of him about stuff he knows that he has nothing to present about.
No, that's
Inquiring
great.
minds want to know.
November 2nd is wide open, and I think I'm looking at Clem's calendar today.
We could
And-
bump
and-
me,
and I
I
think
think
it
we need a
is-
spot, we could bump me and put him there. Just saying, the guy, he knows.
You guys are doing perfectly well. I
All right. Well,
I can, certainly throw a couple of examples of what I do out in GitHub, to show people how I create a container in a configuration. If there are folks in the chat that have specific questions about, how do I do this, by all means, send an email over, because those are the puzzles that I tend to do in the after hours just for fun, right? So
I think we need him to do a basics.
I think we need
Clem.
Clem to share his version of what I did.
no, I think this is good. We can talk.
I don't
Let's
think
talk
so.
after hours. We want to put you on the
We're
calendar.
just busting the chops.
Yeah.
You know.
So, and with that, if anybody has any other direct questions, we can't wrap this up. And we occupied a bunch of people's time. And any other last minute questions, Jonathan, before we leave? and say thank you for the night. And great job, Jonathan. Good job.
Thank you.
Jonathan, on your output, Jonathan, do you, I think you had mentioned once before about creating reports.
I had mentioned one time about creating reports. Are you referring to the CI output, the in-unit XML, JUnit, that type of formatting?
Right now, I'm stuck using report unit.exe and I hate it.
Oh, yeah. I know exactly what you're referring to. I've had to do that in the past. It's been a while because most of the tools that I use output to, I mean, we're trying to start using GitHub Actions, but I've had to use a report unit.exe to do some things. I know exactly what you're talking about. It's been like 4 years since I revisited that, but I would take a look at, well, are you using Azure DevOps or GitHub Actions to run your Pester tests?
I'm not today, and that's what I'm saying. And maybe that would be a presentation point about, how do I learn how to do that? Today it's all canned reports. It's literally all just ad hoc stuff.
Yeah, with Jenkins, that's right. Adrian mentioned that. I remember using in-unit output for Jenkins to ingest, and that's the only extent that I've done. I remember googling about what you referred to, but it's been so long that I don't recall. What he's asking is that airport.xml file that I have open, how do I present that in a way that makes it pretty, like a graph and chart and stuff like that? And there's different tools and CI tools that'll do it for you, and there's different formats that'll do it for you. Pester tries to help you with it, but this is the in-unit XML output of a test. That's what he's asking.
Cool. So, want to wrap it up here?
Yeah, thank you so much.
All right. So, first of all, we want to say thank you to Jonathan Moss for presenting tonight. Excellent job as always, Jonathan. Thank you so much. If you've made it this far into the presentation, we thank you for sticking with us to the end. If you're watching this at home, please check out all the videos that are on our YouTube channel. We'll present some suggestions to you at the end of this video. Check them out. We have over 110 videos on the YouTube channel of various content. If you're looking for something related to PowerShell, chances are it's on our channel, and we love it if you can check it out. And if you like what you see, like those videos, maybe even subscribe to our channel so we can send you more content in the future. So thank you so much. We hope everybody enjoyed it tonight, and we'll see you next time.